My name is Joelle Marin Thibodeau. I'm 34 years old, and the last time I saw my sister, she was sitting across a conference table from me in a building with my name on the door, trying to remember how to breathe. I want you to hold that image for a second, because I've held it for weeks now. My sister, the one who looked me in the eye at our mother's birthday dinner and called my career pathetic, that sister, sitting across from me in my building, applying for a job she needed and couldn't get. And I'm the one who had to decide what to do about it. I'm going to tell you the whole thing, but I need you to understand something first. This story is not about revenge. I know that's what the title sounds like. I know that's maybe why you clicked. And I'm not going to pretend the moment wasn't satisfying in some complicated, grief-adjacent way that I'm still sorting through. But what I actually want to talk about is what it costs to build a life that nobody believes in. What it takes to keep going when the people who were supposed to be your first audience decided you weren't worth watching. Because that's the real story. The rest of it, the conference room, the name on the door, all of that, that's just where the story ends up. What I care about is how it started. And it started in a kitchen in Lake Charles, Louisiana, when I was 13 years old, holding a second place ribbon from a regional science competition, waiting for someone to notice. I grew up in a house that was clean on the outside and complicated on the inside. My parents, my father worked freight dispatch, erratic hours, the kind of schedule that meant you never quite knew when he'd be home or what mood would walk through the door with him. My mother was a dental receptionist, efficient, precise. She ran the household the way she ran that front desk, everything managed, everything in its place, and very little of it warm. There were two daughters, me and then Renata, 4 years younger. I want to be careful about how I describe Renata because this is not a story where my sister is a monster and I'm a saint. She's not a monster. That's actually the hard part. She's a person who was handed a set of beliefs about the world very young, and nobody ever asked her to question them. And she didn't, not for a long time. But I'll tell you what growing up in that house felt like from where I was standing. Renata was easy. That's the only word I have for it. She was social in a way that made adults comfortable. She laughed at the right times. She was pretty in a way people commented on without thinking. The way people comment on weather, just openly, casually, as if it were a fact about the world rather than something being handed to her. Our mother lit up around her, not in a cruel, deliberate way. I don't think my mother sat down and decided to have a favorite. I think Renata just reflected something back at her that I never did. Ease, effortlessness, the performance of not needing anything. I needed things. I was quiet and I was serious and I wanted to understand how things worked. And that particular combination seemed to exhaust everyone around me without my trying to. So I stopped showing what I needed. I learned to build in private. When I was 13, I won second place in a regional science competition. It was a genuine thing. It took me 4 weeks of work, most of it done at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed, because that was the only time the house was quiet enough for me to think. I came home with the ribbon and I was buzzing, genuinely buzzing with something I had never felt before. Not pride exactly, more like proof. like I had demonstrated something to myself that I hadn't been sure of. I walked into the kitchen where my mother was unloading the dishwasher and I held it up. She looked at it. She nodded once, and then she said, "Renata got an A on her spelling test today." That was it. That was the whole response. I kept the ribbon in a drawer for 3 days. Then I threw it away myself because it hurt worse to look at it than to not have it at all. And if you have ever had a moment like that, where you brought someone the best thing you had that day and they looked straight through it, then you already know what I mean when I say I carried that feeling into every room I entered for the next 15 years. That specific feeling of holding something out and having it go unacknowledged. That is the feeling that I want you to hold as you listen to the rest of this. Because everything that comes after, every choice I made, everything I built, everything that happened in that conference room, it all has that ribbon at the center of it. If that's hitting something in you right now, I want you to know you're not alone in it. Hit the like button, subscribe so you hear the rest of this. I'm going to keep going, and it gets harder before it gets better. And if you have someone in your life who needs to hear that what they built quietly still counts, share this with them. Now let me keep going. I put myself through McNeese State on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs, one at a print shop, one waitressing Thursday through Sunday. I studied business administration with a concentration in operations management, which I know sounds dry when I say it out loud like that, but what it actually meant was that I was learning how to make large, complicated things work. How to find the places where systems break down and fix them before they do. It suited me in a way I didn't expect. I was good at seeing the invisible architecture of things, how they held together, where the pressure points were. I graduated with a 3.84 GPA. My mother sent a card with a $20 bill inside. Renata didn't come to the ceremony. I drove myself back to the apartment I shared with 2 other people, and I made a pot of coffee and I sat on the floor because we didn't have enough chairs. And I thought, okay, now I actually start. I moved to Houston a year later for a junior analyst position at Callaway & Voss Consulting Group. Entry level, shared office, the kind of job where you stay late because you have something to prove and also because you genuinely do not have anything better to do on a Tuesday night. I didn't have money. I had one good blazer, a reliable used car, and the particular kind of focus that develops in people who grow up learning that nobody is going to hand them anything. The first person who actually saw that focus, saw it and named it out loud, was a woman named Darlene Okafor. Darlene was the senior administrative coordinator when I arrived. She is 51 years old. She wears magnificent gray locks pinned up with decorative picks, and she has been the institutional memory of that office for longer than most of the senior partners have worked there. She knew things, not gossip, structural things. Who actually made decisions and who just thought they did. Where the bodies were buried. Whose work was getting credited to whom. The first time she really looked at me was about 3 weeks into the job. I had stayed until almost 9 correcting an error in a client operations report that wasn't my error. It was the senior analyst I was assisting, but it had my name on it as a contributor, and I couldn't let it go out wrong. Darlene was still there when I left. She looked up from her desk and said, "That wasn't your mistake." "No," I said, but you fixed it anyway. It had my name on it. She looked at me for a moment with those quick, dark eyes. Then she said, "Come find me tomorrow morning before anyone else gets in. I want to show you something about how this place actually works." She showed me. Over the next year, she showed me everything. Not because it was her job, but because she had spent 17 years at a previous firm watching capable people get passed over, and she had decided that she was done staying quiet about it. She had decided I was worth not staying quiet for. I didn't know at the time how much that decision would come to matter. I had been at Callaway and Voss for about 2 years when the Sunday dinner happened. I drove back to Lake Charles for my mother's birthday, the way I always did, with the specific internal calibration of someone who has learned exactly how long they can be in that house before it starts costing them more than they have. 3 hours was my number. 3 hours, and then I had a drive to make. Renata arrived late, which she always did, which was understood to be charming rather than inconsiderate. Bryce on her arm, a new ring, that particular champagne flush she gets when she's been somewhere she considers important. The kitchen reorganized around her the way it always did. My mother laughing, my father refilling glasses, Bryce charming everyone effortlessly. I was drying dishes at the sink. I said I had to head back early Monday. And Renata, not even looking at me fully, just sort of half turned in my direction, said, "Right, the consulting thing." "Operations management," I said. She smiled, that particular smile. "It's sweet. You work so hard." And then, "I just always thought you'd do something more, I don't know, visible. It's a little bit pathetic, right? All that work and nobody even knows what you do." Nobody said anything. My mother was already talking about the ring. My father had drifted to the patio. Bryce was looking at his phone. I picked up my bag. I said goodbye. I drove 240 miles back to Houston without turning on the radio, without stopping, without crying. I want to be clear about that last part because I have cried over my family more times than I can count, but not that night. That night, I just drove. And I thought about the ribbon. And I thought about Darlene saying, "I want to show you how this place actually works." And I thought, fine, I will build something so undeniable that the word pathetic cannot survive in the same room as it. Not out of anger, out of something quieter than anger and more durable. Out of the specific, accumulated determination of a person who has been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know her best. I opened my notebook when I got home. I wrote down exactly what Renata had said, word for word. And then I went to sleep because I had a 7 a.m. and I had work to do. 6 years is a long time to build something. It is also somehow not long at all when you are inside it. I want to tell you what those 6 years actually looked like. Not the highlight reel version, not the LinkedIn summary, the actual texture of them. Because I think when people hear a story like mine, they imagine some clean montage. Hard work, promotion, corner office, done. And the reality is so much more specific and so much less cinematic than that. And I think the specificity is the part that matters. The first 3 years at Callaway and Voss, I was invisible in the way that useful people are often invisible. I was the one who caught errors before they became disasters. I was the one who stayed late when a client deliverable was falling apart and nobody wanted to be the person who said it was falling apart. I built systems that other people used without knowing I'd built them. I wrote processes that got adopted without attribution. I did not complain about this. I noted it. I kept my notebooks, I have 4 of them now, filled with observations, patterns, things that are true regardless of how I felt on any given day. I noted who was paying attention and who wasn't. I noted where the gaps were. I noted what the firm actually needed versus what it thought it needed. Darlene noticed everything, of course. That was the thing about Darlene. She saw the whole board. She would stop by my desk at the end of a long day and say something like, "Martin took your framework to the Weston presentation. Did you know that?" And I would say, "Yes." And she would say, "Are you going to do something about it?" And I would say, "I already did. I sent Patrick the original draft with the timestamp." And she would look at me with those eyes and nod once, slowly, and say, "Good girl." Not condescending, like confirmation, like a coach watching an athlete and recognizing the form. The shift happened in year 4. A major client, I won't say the name, was on the verge of ending their contract with Callaway and Voss because the operations model we'd built for them had 3 structural inefficiencies that nobody had addressed because nobody wanted to be the one to tell the partners that the model had problems. I put together a 47-page report. I presented it to the managing partners on a Thursday morning with a revised framework and a 12-week implementation timeline. The client renewed for 3 years at a higher rate. Patrick Callaway, one of the 2 founding partners, called me into his office afterward. He said, and I remember this exactly, "How long have you seen this problem?" I said, 14 months. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" And I said, "I did. I put it in 3 different status reports. I think it didn't register as urgent because it came from me." He didn't argue with that. He just said, "That changes now." It did change. Not immediately and not without friction. There were people at that firm who had been there longer than me who did not love watching what happened next. But it changed. Year 5 brought a senior title and a salary that made me sit in my car for a long time the first time I saw the number. Year 6 brought the restructuring and the conversation with both partners where they told me they were naming the division after me as part of my retention package. I remember Patrick saying it, and I remember thinking very clearly, Renata said nobody would know what I did. I did not say that out loud. I thanked them both and shook their hands and went back to my office and closed the door and sat very still for a moment. The way you sit when something lands that you have been waiting for without admitting you were waiting for it. Then I opened my notebook and I wrote April 9th, Thibodeau Operations Division. They put my name on the door, and then I went back to work. I want to pause here for a second because I think this is the moment in the story where you start to understand what I was actually dealing with. Not just Renata's comment at that dinner. That was one moment, painful but survivable. What I want you to really sit with is the pattern underneath it. The years of being the person in the room who did the actual work while someone else got to be the face of it. The years of bringing something real and having it registered as adequate at best. The years of building in a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was full of all the things I wasn't saying because I had learned very young that saying them didn't help. I wonder if you know what that's like, to work that hard for that long with that little acknowledgement from the people who were supposed to be your first audience. To build something real in a room where no one is clapping. Drop that in the comments for me. Have you ever built something that the people closest to you couldn't see? Because I read every single one and I want to know I'm not just talking to myself here. What I didn't know while I was building all of this was what was happening to Renata. I found out in pieces, the way you find out most things about family when you are not quite in contact, but not quite out of it either. My mother would call occasionally. We had reached a functional détente by that point, civil, managed, neither of us asking too much of the other. Sometimes she mentioned Renata. Sometimes the things she mentioned didn't quite add up. Bryce's business was going through a transition. They had decided to simplify. Renata was thinking about getting back into the workforce just to keep busy. I noted it. I didn't pursue it. The fuller picture came from my cousin Patrice, who still lived in Lake Charles and who was the kind of person who had absorbed all the family news without judgment and delivered it to me with the same matter-of-fact clarity that Darlene brought to everything. Patrice called me on a Sunday evening about 4 months before the conference room moment, and she said, "I'm not calling to cause drama. I'm calling because I think you should know." What I should know was this. Bryce's commercial real estate income had dropped significantly when the market shifted, and it had not recovered. They were behind on a second mortgage. Renata had been quietly applying for jobs for months, a process that was not going well, partly because her resume had a 6-year gap, and partly because the experience she did have was being presented in ways that didn't hold up under scrutiny. She had not told anyone in the family how serious it was. She was still performing the life she used to have. The right clothes, the right restaurant appearances, the careful social media presence, while the actual financial architecture underneath it was crumbling. "She's scared," Patrice said. Not as an excuse, just as a fact. I sat with that for a while after I hung up. I made coffee. I stood at my kitchen counter in the quiet of my condo, which I own, which I paid off early, which took years and a level of financial discipline that bordered on austere. And I thought about my sister being scared and not telling anyone. About performing security while everything underneath it shifted. I recognized that, not the specific circumstances, but the performance of being fine. I had done my own version of it for years, just in the opposite direction, performing smallness rather than largeness, making myself easier to overlook, so that the gap between what I was and what people acknowledged would hurt less. We had both learned in that house in Lake Charles that you did not show what you actually needed. We had just applied the lesson differently. I did not call her. I didn't know what I would say. And I have learned to distrust the impulse to reach out when I don't know what I'm reaching for. I went back to work. I kept building. I did not think about Renata again for another 3 weeks until the Tuesday morning when my desk phone rang and Darlene said my name in that particular way she has, and told me to come to the lobby. I want to tell you what I saw when I came around that corner. I want to tell you because I have replayed it so many times, trying to understand what I felt, and I still don't have one clean word for it. What I felt was layered in the specific way that only family can layer things. Because family gets into you at a level that predates language, predates logic, predates every boundary you have carefully constructed as a functional adult. What I saw was my sister. Sitting in one of the low gray chairs near the reception desk, in a blush wrap dress I recognized from a photograph she had posted 3 years ago from some charity luncheon. A white blazer that didn't quite match the formality she was going for. A designer tote bag that was genuine but visibly tired. A fresh manicure, shell pink, perfect, which told me immediately that she had spent money specifically for today, which told me immediately how much today mattered to her. She was looking at her phone with the controlled expression of someone performing composure. I have seen that expression in the mirror. I knew exactly what it was covering. And Darlene appeared at my elbow, quiet and steady, and said, "She's here for the senior marketing associate interview, 10 o'clock slot. She's been on the candidate list for 2 weeks. Her application says Renata Hughes." I didn't connect the name until she checked in and gave her ID. I kept my eyes on my sister. Does she know? She has not looked up from her phone since she sat down. 4 seconds of silence. In those 4 seconds, I thought about the ribbon. I thought about the word pathetic. I thought about Patrice saying she's scared. I thought about Patrick Calloway saying that changes now. I thought about my notebook with my name in it from April 9th. And then I made a decision, not a vengeful decision, a professional one, because that is what I am above everything else, a professional. And because I had built this place, this division, this reputation, by doing things the right way, even when it cost me something, I was not going to change that now, not even for this. "Send her to conference room B," I said. "I'll be in at 10. I turned around. I walked back to my office. I picked up my portfolio. I took a breath that I made sure nobody saw me take. And I went to work. I want to tell you about the 2 minutes before I walked into conference room B. I was standing in the hallway outside it, just standing, portfolio under my arm, the way I stand before any significant meeting. And I was doing the thing I always do, which is run through what I know and what I need to accomplish and what I will not allow to happen. I do this before every difficult conversation. I make a list in my head. Facts, not feelings. Objectives, not grievances. It is the most useful thing I have ever taught myself to do. But this time, standing outside that door, the list kept getting interrupted by the kitchen in Lake Charles, by the ribbon in the drawer, by the word pathetic sitting in my notebook in my own handwriting, exactly as she'd said it, because I had written it down that night so I would not let myself minimize it later. By Patrice's voice saying she's scared. By the image of that shell pink manicure, the one thing Renata had spent money on specifically for today, and what it told me about how desperate today was for her. I stood in that hallway for 90 seconds longer than I needed to. Then I straightened my blazer, the charcoal gray one that fits like it was made for me, because 2 pieces of this outfit were, and I opened the door. Conference room B has a long oval table, 8 chairs, and a window that looks out over the parking structure. It is not the most impressive room in the building. It is functional and clean, and on the wall to the left of the door, mounted at eye level, There is a rectangular placard in brushed silver that reads, Thibodeau Operations Division, Callaway and Voss Consulting Group. I had walked past that placard every working day for 2 years without really seeing it anymore. It had become part of the architecture, furniture, background. Renata had apparently been seeing it for the 4 minutes she'd been sitting alone in that room before I arrived. When I opened the door, she was facing it. She turned when she heard me come in, and I watched. I could not help watching. I was watching with the same precise attention I bring to everything. I watched the sequence of expressions that moved across her face in the 3 seconds between turning and recognizing and understanding. There was a flicker of professional composure, the face she had put on for the interview. Then recognition, her eyes changing, something behind them lurching. Then understanding, not slow understanding, fast, total, the kind that arrives all at once and lands like stepping off a curb you didn't see. She looked at me. She looked at the placard. She looked back at me. I crossed the room and sat down across from her. I placed my portfolio on the table. I looked at her directly, the way I look at anyone in this room, and I said, "Good morning. Thank you for coming in." Her mouth opened. Nothing for a moment. Then, "Joelle." "Ms. Thibodeau in this context," I said, not harshly, precisely. "Should we begin?" The interview panel for a senior associate position at Callaway and Voss consists of 3 people. The department head requesting the hire, in this case, our head of external communications, a careful and attentive man named Derek, who had no idea about any of the history in that room. Our HR representative, Calvin Marsh, who has been with the firm for 9 years and has the particular skill of noticing everything while appearing to notice nothing. And me. I asked the same questions I always ask: candidate experience, specific examples of campaign management, budget oversight, team leadership, measurable outcomes. The same questions I would ask anyone sitting in that chair. What became apparent, not immediately, but in layers, the way structural problems always reveal themselves in layers, was that Renata's application had built a version of her professional history that the reality of the conversation could not support. The marketing coordinator role she had listed. 2 years on paper, 5 years on the resume. The campaign budgets she claimed to have managed, inflated to figures that implied a level of organizational complexity she had never actually worked inside. I asked 2 technical follow-up questions, specific ones, the kind that anyone who had genuinely done what the resume described would answer without pausing, because the answers would be in their muscle memory. She paused. Calvin glanced at me from across the table. I did not glance back. I made a small note on my portfolio and waited. Renata's answers ran long without covering ground. She was working hard. I could see her working, the way you can see someone treading water when they are trying to look like they are swimming. There was a moment where she laughed at something that was not funny, the specific social reflex of someone buying time. There was a moment where she started a sentence 3 times before finishing it. And then she said, "I know my resume might look... I took some time away, but I appreciate that context," I said. "We have 2 more questions." Calvin asked the last 2. I watched her answer them. I watched Derek watching her. I watched the room doing what rooms do when a candidate is not getting the job. The small, almost imperceptible recalibration of body language, the pen going still, the eye contact becoming professional rather than engaged. When it was over, Derek thanked her for her time. Calvin gathered his notes. I stood the way I stand at the conclusion of every interview. And then Renata stopped performing. It happened all at once. The composure she had been maintaining, the blowout, the blazer, the prepared answers, it didn't crumble exactly. It just stopped, like a light going off. She looked across the table at me, not at Derek, not at Calvin, at me. "Joe," she said, quietly. The way she said my name when we were children and she needed something. "I need this job." The room was very still. This was the moment. This was the single moment I had not prepared for in the 90 seconds I stood in the hallway, because I had prepared for everything except this. For her dropping the performance completely and just saying the true thing, bare and direct and without any architecture around it. I need this job. And here is what I want to tell you, because I think it is the most important thing in this entire story. I felt it. I felt it land. Not as triumph, not as satisfaction, as grief almost. The specific grief of watching someone you grew up with arrive at a place that should never have been inevitable. That was the result of a set of beliefs nobody ever asked her to examine. Beliefs that the world would keep confirming until it didn't. And here was the moment it didn't. Here was my sister, 30 years old, in a room with my name on the wall, saying, "I need this." If you have ever loved someone who hurt you and felt both things at the same time, fully, simultaneously, without one canceling the other out, then you know what I was sitting with in that moment. That is the thing nobody tells you about building a life without the people who were supposed to be in it. You don't stop loving them. You just love them from a distance that keeps you intact. Hit that like button if this is hitting you somewhere real. Subscribe if you want to hear how this ends, because I promise you there is more. Now let me keep going. "We'll be in touch within 5 business days," I said. "Thank you for your time." I stood. I held the door open. She walked through it without looking at me again. I did not go back to my office immediately. I went to the break room, which was empty at that hour, and I made coffee with the particular deliberateness of someone giving their hands something to do so their mind can work. I was standing at the counter when Darlene came in. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside me and poured herself a cup from the pot that was already made and leaned against the counter. This is one of the things I love about Darlene. She has never in 9 years filled a silence that needed to stay empty. After a while, she said, "You okay?" "Yes," I said. And then, "I don't know." She nodded. "What are you going to do?" "Recommend we pass on her candidacy. The resume issues are disqualifying on merit. Calvin saw it. Derek saw it. It has nothing to do with anything else." "That's the right call." "I know." She looked at me, but I set down my spoon. She said she needed it, not performed needed it, actually needed it. I paused. She's never needed anything from me before, not once. Darlene was quiet for a moment. Then she said it. The thing she says when she is done waiting for you to arrive somewhere on your own. Joelle, you can have compassion for someone and still not give them something they're not qualified for. Those are not the same decision. I looked at her. The job would have been wrong for her and wrong for the firm, she said. That is true regardless of everything else. And you know it. I know it. So you know what you're going to do. Yes. She picked up her coffee. She patted my arm once. One solid, deliberate pat. The kind that means, I see you and you're going to be fine. And she walked out. I stood there for another minute. The break room hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of someone's keyboard down the hall, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday afternoon continuing without any awareness of what had just happened in conference room B. I thought about the ribbon. I thought about how I had put it in a drawer and then thrown it away rather than let it keep costing me. I thought about how that was the thing I had always done. Disposed of the evidence of being hurt rather than letting anyone see that I was carrying it. I thought about my sister's face when she said, I need this job. The way the performance stopped. The way she looked in that moment. Not like the woman at the birthday dinner with the champagne flush and the new ring and the casual contempt. But like someone much younger. Someone maybe a little bit lost. Someone who had been told all her life that she was sufficient as she was, and was only now, in this conference room on a Tuesday morning, beginning to understand that sufficient is not the same as capable. I was not going to give her the job, but I was not done yet either. The rejection letter went out on day 4. Standard language, professional, clean, no additional content. Thank you for your time. We have decided to move forward with another candidate. We wish you well in your search. Calvin drafted it. I approved it. It went out through the standard HR process the same way every other rejection letter goes out. I did not add anything. I did not remove the warmth that isn't in those letters to begin with. I treated it exactly the way I would treat any other candidacy that did not meet the requirements of the role. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I did not make it cold to punish her, and I did not soften it to protect her. I treated her like a professional, which is the thing she had come to that building asking to be treated as. That felt right to me. That felt like the most honest thing I could give her. What I did next was not part of any professional process. It was a choice I made alone on a Thursday evening, sitting at my kitchen table with my notebook open in front of me and a cup of tea that had gone cold while I was thinking. I called her. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I could hear in the half second before she said hello that she had looked at the screen and considered not answering. I understood that. I had considered not calling. It's me, I said. I know. A pause. Joe, let me go first, I said. Please. She went quiet. I can't recommend you for this role. The qualifications aren't there, and that's a real problem. Not just with us, but with every firm at that level. The resume needs to reflect what you've actually done, not what you wish you'd done. That gap is going to keep being an issue until you address it honestly. I paused. But I know someone. Her name is Sandra Trujillo. She runs a small creative agency in Baton Rouge, and she's building a marketing team from scratch. She specifically looks for people she can train rather than people who arrive already finished. It's not management level. it's a starting point. You would have to actually build something from the ground up, and it would take time, and it would be real work. Another pause, shorter. I'm going to send her your information if you want me to. Silence on the line. Long enough that I checked once to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then Renata said, in a voice I had genuinely never heard from her before, not flat, not performed, not the voice she used when she was managing an impression. She said, "Why are you doing this?" I had thought about how to answer that. I had thought about it for 3 days. "Because you're my sister," I said. "And because somebody should have told you years ago that you were going to need to know how to do something real." I did not say the way nobody told me either. I did not say because I know what it is to build in a direction nobody believed in. I did not say because I sat in a parking lot once and decided to build something undeniable, and I think you could do the same thing if someone gave you an actual starting place instead of just confirming over and over that you were already enough. I didn't say any of it. I didn't need to. The silence on Renata's end had the quality of someone hearing a thing they already knew, arriving from a direction they hadn't expected. "Okay," she said finally. Quiet, just that. "I'll reach out to Sandra tomorrow." "Okay." "Renata?" "Yeah?" I almost said something else. There was something else sitting right there, right at the edge of the sentence. Something about the birthday dinner and the ribbon and the word pathetic and the 240 miles I drove in silence and the notebook where I had written her words down so I would not minimize them. All of it right there. I let it stay there. "Good luck," I said. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that, in the quiet of the condo I had bought with money I had earned doing the pathetic job, and I looked at my notebook and I did not write anything. Sometimes the thing that happens does not need to be recorded. Sometimes you just let it be over. About 3 weeks after that call, Patrice phoned on a Sunday afternoon, her usual time, her usual warmth, the background sound of her kids somewhere in the house. She said, "I have something to tell you, and I need you to just hear it without making it into a thing." "When have I ever made anything into a thing?" I said. She laughed. "Renata started at Trujillo Creative on Monday." I set down my coffee cup. "Sandra called Renata directly the day after you reached out. Apparently they talked for an hour. Sandra told her it was an entry-level role with a clear growth path, and Renata said..." Patrice paused here, and I could hear her choosing how to say the next part. "Apparently, Renata said she was done pretending to be somewhere she wasn't, that she needed to start from where she actually was." I did not say anything for a moment. "That's good," I said. "Yeah," Patrice said. "It is." There was a comfortable pause between us, the kind that exists between people who have known each other long enough to not need to fill every space. Then Patrice said, "She's not going to call you. You know that, right? Not for a while. Maybe not for a long while. That's just who she is." "I know." "Does that bother you?" I thought about it, honestly, the way I try to think about things when someone I trust asks me directly. "Less than I expected," I said. "I think I needed to do the thing more than I needed the response to it." Patrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your dad would have been real proud of you, Joe. I just want you to know I think that." I had to put the phone down for a second after that, just a second. I looked out the window of my condo at the flat Houston sky, blue and pale and enormous, and I felt my father somewhere in it. Not supernaturally, just in the way that the people we lose become part of the atmosphere eventually, part of the weather we move through. He had been a complicated man. We had repaired some of it in his last 2 years. Not all of it. Enough. Thank you, I said when I picked the phone back up. That means a lot coming from you. About 2 weeks after that, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't read it. I get enough unknown number texts that my reflex is to ignore them. Something made me open it. This is Bryce. Using my phone because Renata doesn't know how to say it yet. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry. Those were her exact words. She said to tell you she means it. I read it twice. I put my phone face down on my desk. I picked up my notebook. I wrote, April 14th. She said she's sorry. I believe she means it. I closed the notebook. I looked at it sitting on my desk, worn cover, the fourth one I've filled, the one with April 9th on one of the early pages where I wrote my name on the door, the one with the entry from that night in Lake Charles, her words exactly as she'd said them, preserved precisely, so I could not let myself soften them into something more manageable than they were. I thought about what it meant that the apology had come through Bryce's phone because she didn't know how to say it yet. The yet did a lot of work in that sentence. It meant she was getting there. It meant the direction was toward something rather than away from it. I was willing to hold space for that without requiring it to arrive on any particular schedule. I did not respond to the text that day. I thought about what I wanted to say and whether I wanted to say it and what saying it would mean. I am deliberate about that kind of thing. I have learned to be. 2 days later, I sent back, I know. Thank you for telling me. Tell her I said good luck with the new job. That was all. That was enough. I want to tell you about the morning after I sent that text because I think it is the real ending of this story. Not the conference room, not the phone call, not even the apology. The real ending is quieter than all of those. I woke up at 6:15, which is when I always wake up. I made coffee in the kitchen of my condo. I stood at the counter in the early light, Houston spring light, which is soft and slightly golden before the heat arrives. And I drank it slowly, looking out at the street below, watching the neighborhood begin its day. A woman walking a large tan dog, a man in scrubs heading to his car. The ordinary machinery of other people's lives continuing in their own directions. I thought about my father. I thought about Darlene, who would already be at her desk or close to it, brewing the office coffee and knowing everything about everyone before the day officially started. I thought about Sandra Trujillo in Baton Rouge, who I had never met in person, but who had called me after Renata's first week to say, your sister is a hard worker when someone actually asks her to work. And the complicated warmth I had felt hearing that, the pride and the grief sitting side by side the way they always do when it comes to family. I thought about the ribbon, second place, regional science competition, 13 years old, buzzing with something I hadn't had words for yet. Proof. That was the word I had landed on then, and I still think it was the right word. I had been looking for proof that I was capable of something real, and I had found it. And then I had walked into a kitchen and held it out and had it go unacknowledged. And I had learned in that moment to build in private. Here is what I know now that I did not know then. Building in private is not the same as building alone. Darlene was there. Patrice was there. My father in the last 2 years was there in the halting, imperfect way of a man trying to repair something before he ran out of time. Sandra Trujillo, who I had never met, was there for my sister in a way that I had made possible. The building that happens in private still happens in a world full of people. You just have to find the ones who are actually watching. My name is Joelle Marin Thibodeau. I'm 34 years old, and I know what it feels like to be exactly where I am supposed to be. Not because my sister walked into a room with my name on the door. That was just a Tuesday. What I am supposed to be is not a position or a title or a plaque on a conference room wall. What I am supposed to be is someone who builds real things, tells the truth about what they cost, and does not mistake being underestimated for being small. I am not small. I never was. It just took a while for the room to be big enough to show it. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I mean it genuinely. I'm not filling time here. This whole story at its center is about being dismissed by someone who was supposed to know you, about building something real in a silence that nobody else was paying attention to, and about what you do with the power when it finally arrives. So here is my question. Has someone ever underestimated you in a way that quietly changed the direction of your life? Not broke you, changed you. Sent you somewhere you might not have gone if they had just seen you clearly from the beginning. I want to know. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I think the answers to that question are some of the most important stories people carry around without ever telling anyone. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt like something you've been trying to find the words for, hit the like button. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because I have more stories and I intend to keep telling them. And if you know someone who is building something real right now in a room where nobody is clapping, share this with them. Let them know that the room catches up eventually. I'll see you in the next one.